into another movie, which apparently is a really big success on Hulu, if I heard correctly, which is Run, which is from the writers and director of Searching, which means I was going to be all over this, and had very high hopes. So, and obviously it's not like the same gimmick that Searching was, where it was on the laptop screens and all that stuff. But it's still just as exciting just seeing them just tackle another thriller in general. I was all for. So, and of course, while they don't reuse that particular technique, there's still many things that kind of give it the same vibe, like how they immediately established in Searching that they know how to open a movie and establish where we are, particularly using montage. And they'll lay out all the details for us in this really smooth way that's really it feels like it's a lot of information, but they do it just enough to where we're able to get it all in. And then once we have all this information, which keeps exposition from being prominent, which is usually annoying throughout movies like this that have this much information, they establish everything quickly so that all the suspense that can be had without having to throw in other explanations, and it can just roll along and just pull us along with it, and that's what it does pretty much the entire time. And this is mostly from the perspective of the daughter of Sarah Paulson, because we get the opening scene before we get a lot of information thrown at us, which is Sarah Paulson has given birth prematurely, and the baby is clearly small and unhealthy, and they're trying to keep it alive as well as they can. And then we cut forward, and now the daughter is 17, I think, and wheelchair bound, but with all the problems she could possibly have. And she is played by Kira Allen, I think her name is, who, if I remember the credits correctly, this is her first movie. And it was also something I learned after the fact that apparently she is actually disabled, which is really interesting because even despite that, you would think that would do a lot for the character as is, but there's still so much like acting involved in this. By that I mean not just the fact that she has to remain terrified for most of it convincingly, which she definitely does, but there's still plenty of physical acting involved also, which she does really well. Like I was kind of amazed when I saw the credits and she had the introducing credit, and it's like there's no way this isn't an experienced actress already, but here she is. And when we see the interaction between her and Paulson at the start here, what really was interesting was how the first maybe 15 minutes or so kind of almost feel like a sort of modern version of Gaslight, where it's like she's starting to realize, the daughter's starting to realize that things might be a little suspicious suddenly, and some things aren't quite adding up. And the way Paulson talks to her and convinces her of things so quickly, because Paulson is this supposedly very trustworthy character. Um, this is a movie that's really hard to talk about. I don't want to give away any of its secrets, but it's kind of, you have to be kind of really careful going around it if you're talking to people that have yet to actually see it. But the thing about that though is, like, when I say the first 15 minutes or so feel like some sort of modern day Gaslight in a way, just when this is the kind of movie where just when you get settled into it, the reason it becomes hard to talk about it without revealing its secrets is the fact that it's never, once you kind of figure out where it might be going, it always finds a way to change what it is and what direction it's going. And it's one of those cases where it's smart enough to realize where we are as the audience and what we're going to figure out. So it doesn't really try to hide for too long things that it thinks they think we'll figure out fast. So just when we, the audience, are getting ready to possibly suspect something, there might be a reveal, and then we'll just go on to the next thing. And that's pretty much what the movie is, where it's like, usually movies like this or thrillers like this tend to depend on like just doing its thing, and then at the end there'll be some really big twist or something. But this is a movie that is like constantly unraveling from the first 15 minutes through the whole thing. And like it felt like every 15 minutes or so, there was a new thing that unraveled and something else underneath it, and it just kind of kept going in that way. And so that's the kind of thing that's just going to keep you. And the movie's really short. Also, it's like doesn't even break an hour and a half. But that's gonna like just keep you completely glued to it, even if it starts to get in more sort of a '90s thriller kind of direction, where things start getting a little more over the top. It's still the journey that got us here was such a kind of a slow burn up to that point, or at least a slow boil up to that point, that it almost feels earned when it starts to get a little bigger, and a little more in those. We've talked about multiple times before about those thrillers that feel like they're kind of placed in the wrong decade, where it feels like there was kind of that mid '90s era where all the cheesy and trashy thrillers kind of looked alike. It kind of eventually gets into that territory, but I love that shit, so I'm gonna praise that regardless. But they're still leading up to that all throughout the middle. There's so many smart choices that come about, especially with not to mention Paulson's performance keeping this at a constant. Where it's one of those cases where you would think at this point, when we see Sarah Paulson playing an unhinged character, it would be more like, yes, we not only have we seen this before, we've seen this many times before. But the thing is she's so good at that. It's like you can tell already that you're not. It's not a tiresome thing because it's still working. And there's like so like eventually for a while it also starts to feel a lot like Misery, but I say that as a compliment, particularly in moments when it's like, Chloe's doing something she may not supposed to be doing under Paulson's rule anyway, and we get these views of Paulson outside gardening, downstairs, and it's whether or not she's visible is kind of shows us how much time we have to do whatever we need to do, and we never know when that clock is going to run out or when we think it's possibly run out, or but maybe not. And just constantly questioning the safety of the character Chloe throughout the entire thing, based on the whereabouts of Paulson's character alone. And there's so much suspense in just that by itself. But there's also plenty of editing tricks they throw in here that are clever but also comedic, but also upping the suspense at the same time. Like there's that really great edit in Searching when there's the dude that has he claims he has an alibi, but for some reason he won't give it. And it's this really suspenseful thing of the more he won't give up his alibi, the more suspicious he becomes, and the more suspenseful it gets, because it's like, oh, this could be the dude we're looking for. This could be the dude that knows everything. And then there's just that one cut that just reveals that he was just embarrassed to say that his alibi is like a Bieber concert or something. And there's plenty of cuts that feel like that in this. There is a cut to a tomato in this, that is like mind-blowingly genius and hilarious, while also being a terrifying reveal at the same time. And I love how much that doesn't make sense if you don't know the context. And there's also plenty of stuff like that. There's a weapon of choice moment, that's a really nice fake out, but also foreshadowing. And they're just always throwing in little clever touches like that, much like we saw in Searching. Though I don't think this is as effective as Searching is, or as suspenseful as Searching is, or as emotionally involving as Searching, but for a second movie and for how much high expectations we would have based on Searching, this is a really good second outing. And not like having a concept that's kind of the face of it in the way that Searching did. And talking about the way they blend some comedic aspects to it, there's some cases where it might feel like it doesn't quite belong. Like, we're getting to a pretty dramatic point about a half an hour in, and it's a pretty crucial moment. And in this moment, there is a character present where all of her lines are kind of comedic, particularly within the situation itself, despite this being one of the more big and crucial moments of the whole movie itself. But it's like, it's equally as comedic as it is suspenseful, and kind of crushing in a sense also. So it's, yeah, the way they're able to balance that, where I don't think it always entirely lands, because there's some leaps that are made, obviously, that you kind of expect out of movies like this, where you kind of maybe desires something maybe a little bit more clever to kind of have gotten that scene going rather than just sort of a kind of a cheap comedic beat or whatever. But it still ends up working in the long run. Um, and as far as like in some of those might seem like leaps in another movie, but this movie's so good at establishing itself and its characters that they're not. Like how we're setting up that Chloe is smart enough that she's more than likely going to get accepted into the college that she wants to get into. So when she actually, and through like stuff we've seen around her room and the stuff she's working on, when it comes to the point that she's going to have to use science to help her in certain situations, it makes perfect sense, and we've pretty much gotten to that point pretty authentically, that she would know how to do these certain things. Because oftentimes in movies like this, when characters do that, it feels like, oh, they just know that because it helps the movie move along. But the fact that that a lot of time is spent on establishing that long before it's ever actually important or when it's used, shows how smart the writing and the build up and the character stuff was all done to get us to those points. But yeah, and like I said, it's really just unraveling kind of the whole time. Or like I said, even if like anything you say that takes place explicitly, like if you explain it explicitly after like the first 15 minutes or so, it could probably be considered a spoiler. Because it's just constant as it goes along. And I'm pretty sure, though it sounds like I've said a lot, I'm pretty sure I haven't really said anything. So there's that. But like I said, once it does get towards the last 10 minutes or so, it does kind of fall into a much more standard thriller place, and it's kind of a standard thriller climax. And like I said, gets us in that kind of 90s thriller kind of area, which like I said, I love. That's a compliment coming from me. But if that's not your thing, then you will have preferred this movie stick in the direction it kind of started in. But I feel like the progression, by the time we get to the climax, makes enough sense, and it's enough of a slow burn that we get to explode all we want in the last 10 minutes or so. So yeah, and the final scene is great. I wasn't really sure when it kind of kept going a little bit, but yeah, the final scene is great also. So yeah. So like I said, that sounds like a lot, but I don't think I've said anything too crucial or spoilery or anything like that. Though if you have seen it, it probably a lot of this stuff will. But it's as far as hearing it completely out of context. Hopefully, if you haven't seen it, you're totally lost. But I don't know why you would watch a review that's gone on this long if you're going to try to go into this blind. So whatever. So I think that's going to be it for this one. So we're going to continue going through all these new releases and all this other stuff. So until the next one, I think that's it.